Welcome back to another episode of Built and Backed. Joining me today is Nina Pfister, the co-founder of Mag PR, bringing over a decade of professional experience helping VC firms and early-stage B2B startups find their voice in crowded markets through strategic media relations. She built the boutique agency from the ground up, led by senior-only practitioners who deliver both strategy and execution without the typical agency turnaround. Nina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me and Happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year. I'm excited to have you here, especially because, as you know, PR is such a hot topic for startups and VC firms to be thinking about. And so, before we get into that stuff and going into your insights, I'd love to have you introduce yourself further and share more about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you did a great job with the agency overview, but I got started and built this firm back in 2016, really with the goal to be kind of the anti-big agency. So I like to say we're small on purpose. As you mentioned, we're a team of senior practitioners only. So the three of us bring a collective decades of experience, and we see everything from strategy all the way through execution. So you're not, getting sold by a senior rep and then getting kicked down the ladder to junior folks. So
Mhm.
our primary focus is working with VC firms and the early stage B2B startups that they back across industry. So we do a lot of different and fun verticals and horizontally a lot of different types of emerging tech. I'm obviously doing a lot in the AI space right now, but really running the gamut.
I love it. And I'm curious to hear what made you really interested in tech, especially B2B tech specifically.
Yeah, so I actually I started my career in tech,
Mhm.
working for IDG Enterprise, which is now Foundry, here in Massachusetts, working for their CIO Executive Council. So really walked into tech not knowing anything about what a CIO is, what they do. So got a lot of learning early on, and then ended up working in the agency world for a tech PR larger agency early on as well, where I had a lot of great training and mentorship launching B2B startups.
Mhm.
So always was kind of in my background, worked in sales, also in the tech space for the duration of that time period. So my whole career has been in tech, kind of by accident at first, but really excited to be in this space, especially with
Yeah.
all the growth that we're seeing right now.
Absolutely. And what was that moment when you decided that it was time to go off and do your own thing?
Yeah, so I was actually in an executive sales role at the time for a cybersecurity startup out of New York. I was working remotely and did have some flexibility when my son was 1.5, and just found I was traveling unexpectedly too much and it wasn't really a good fit for me. So I decided to build my first book of business and give entrepreneurship a try.
Oh, I love that. And so, one of the things that I really love to kind of pick your brain on is as startups and founders are listening to this episode and they're thinking that it might be time to add PR into the mix of what they're doing. What are some things that might signal that it is time to incorporate this and seek out a professional?
Yeah, so there's many factors that play into it. I have these conversations all the time with early stage founders, looking at pre-seed through Series C usually. Um, I think the first question that's important to ask is why?
Hmm.
Why are you thinking about it? So is it to attract top talent? Is it because you just landed funding and you're excited to shout it from the rooftops? But what is the purpose of PR? I think is the first question that really defines the programming. So that's number one. And number two, are you ready for PR in the sense of, do you have your baseline core messaging locked in? Do you have proven, tested micro target audiences that you've gotten feedback from? It's really just looking at the stage at first of the company and the maturity of really their marketing baselines in the beginning, because the goal for PR is to amplify,
Hmm.
right, and define your market positioning. And you really can't do that until you know who you are first. And so I run into that a lot with early stage founders who are excited to come out and start talking about it. But then when they start talking about it, they're shifting gears. Things are changing in real time with target audience and things of that nature, that can really take away from the purpose of a PR program, and make it unsuccessful, which stinks when you're investing dollars. So
Totally. And you mentioned a good point about knowing what you want to use PR for, like what the end goal is. And so this question might be a little bit broader, open-ended, but what is like the typical ramp up time frame that a client might need for PR? So it's like, of course, they can't just turn on PR and hope to get results tomorrow. It's like if they're looking to reach a certain goal, is there a certain number of days or even months that you would recommend they kind of use to lead up to that big initiative that they have?
yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, I think it again goes back to what is the goal, because the sort of turnaround time to experience the benefits of PR are different depending on what you're looking to get out of it. To give you an example, if you're looking at doing a funding push, let's say you just secured a seed round, you've got excited investors who are ready to push you out the door into the world of media. A lot of times they're the ones who are bringing us in for that first announcement. And, we can do what I like to call a quick and dirty program that's 30 to 60 days, and you're getting that first flurry of media coverage that's typically giving you that top of funnel brand awareness. You'll see maybe some website spikes and things of that nature, or an elevation in organic search,
Hmm.
or you may have a couple of leads come in. Nothing crazy. It cannot be the end all be all for your sales process. But those are some things, in a short amount of time that you could expect from a larger early stage news item. Versus if you're looking at PR from a long game perspective for talent acquisition, future investment, just general top of funnel awareness, and creating like that drumbeat of visibility over time, we like to start with a 6-month program.
Hmm.
And I think that gives us a good amount of time to really track some results, and again, monitor things like site traffic, even social engagement. Are you gaining more new followers? Is your organic search going up? Those are the types of, are you capturing share of voice as well? That's a good one to look at after 6 months versus your competitors.
Hmm.
So are you in the mix of those types of conversations that matter? And also the quality of media that we're getting over time. We like to say PR builds on itself, right? So the more that
Yeah.
you're getting out there as an expert source, the better quality opportunities are going to compound over time, because you've earned it. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that I wonder founders might get hung up on is thinking that because they're not frequently launching something new or announcing something that PR isn't the fit for them. But as you know, PR is always important. And so what do you usually advise when it comes to that? If like there isn't anything new happening, but making sure that clients are still getting noticed and featured in places.
yeah, that's huge actually right now, because a lot of times what happens is we have founders who come in the door for, let's say, a seed announcement. We do this awesome, successful 60-day sprint, and then we're not hearing from them for a year. They want to pause all PR activity, and maybe a lot budget elsewhere. Common, and we understand that, it really depends on your budget at that point. But ideally, you're using your news items to propel you forward into these quieter times, where you can be in the media mix as a thought leader.
Hmm.
And as you know, that's across mediums. So we primarily focus on the earned media foundation. So how are we leveraging third-party press to boost your visibility as both a leader and an organization? That should also be paired with your social efforts. Obviously, any like paid advertising that you're doing, owned content like blog writing and things of that nature. A lot of founders are getting on other platforms like Substack and almost creating their own media channels, podcasts, obviously. Um, so those are the things that, in those kind of quiet non-news times, that are a lot of times are equally as impactful as those news announcements. And so it's more so, like I said, building sort of that cadence and a drumbeat of visibility over time, so that you're establishing yourself and your organization as a notable thought leader in your space.
Yeah, and I love the way that you phrase that, having like that drumbeat and consistent presence showing up in all these different channels and whatnot. And it makes me think too that just from someone who's not in PR, something I've seen from the outside is like I feel like there seems to be a shift from people caring so much about getting in tier one, which of course is still important, but to now also really valuing like the individual, like you mentioned, Substacks or newsletters or like smaller blogs that
Yeah.
journalists or writers might have. And so I'd love to hear more about that shift that you're seeing.
Yeah, so I think there's still very much an appetite for tier one press.
Mhm.
That's never going to go away. The journalist pool has shrunken significantly, so it's becoming increasingly more challenging to get into those outlets. So how are we finding a workaround to keep that consistent presence going, while also it's we call it the media mix, right? So we rank it tier one, tier two, tier three. I look at tier one as, for tech startups, they're looking at TechCrunch, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Business Insider, et cetera, the mainstream kind of tech business media. Then you have all these other layers that really depend on your target audience. So we look at the trades going vertically. Even if you are not vertically focused on, let's say you're like a health tech startup, that's very obvious. But if you're a horizontal tech company and you're trying to sell into these different verticals, how can we talk about use cases within those different industries to give you a presence there and show that that's a space you're playing in? So that's another whole bucket of media that is massively impactful.
Mhm.
From a sales perspective in particular, sales reps can literally take those stories and be armed with resources to go and talk to prospects, for instance, early on. The other one that you mentioned is obviously looking at more of sort of these influencer newsletters that are popping up. I think doing research on where they matter, right? And is that actually your audience is important for those because founders are busy.
Yeah.
So we have to be really careful about their time. There's a difference between getting on a media interview that's going to take 30 minutes and some prep in advance and follow up versus maybe doing an email Q&A interview with some of those lower level tiers. They never hurt if they're aligned, but we are more focused on quality over quantity.
Yes, and that was one thing that I was just thinking as you were sharing that is that idea of quality over quantity. And so thinking about where you want to divert your time, energy, resources, and money to ensure that it's the best fit for what you're looking to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. And that really comes down to the strategy of
Mhm.
the program that we're doing. Another thing to think about too is outside of industry vertical trades, there's also a lot of, for tech in particular, various trades that are horizontal focused. So obviously for AI in particular, you've got Unite AI, AI Journal, AI Business, right? So there's a lot of reputable outlets that are just covering the space where you're building too, which is something to look into. So I always recommend to founders like, what are you consuming too, in your space to keep tabs on kind of the market you're building in, because that's always a good indicator.
Definitely. And on the topic of strategy, I'm excited to ask you this question because I've seen you share and talk about it, which is the component of focusing on AEO and how that relates to PR and a strategy moving forward. And so I'd love to hear more about your perspective on that and why it's something founders and VC should be thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. This is very early days for answer engine optimization, which is now like another parallel with SEO, right? So everything was all about SEO before. Now we have AI search in the mix, which for B2B founders is becoming increasingly important. There's a lot of research coming out from Muckrack, which is a PR software tool in particular, excuse me, that we've been paying attention to, just around like AI citations and where search is actually pulling from. Because a lot of our clients in the B2B space have, enterprise CIO targets that they're trying to get in front of. So if we have these enterprise CIOs who are extremely overwhelmed by vendors, they're drowning in emerging tech. How do we get in front of them in every search platform from a discoverability standpoint?
Mhm.
And so what we've been seeing from research that we're still testing ourselves are, what are the best outlets per client per search query? So just taking a look at how do we back out of those search queries and where they're pulling from to see if we can insert clients into trending discussions or just polls to surface them in those queries, which I think, again, is going to become increasingly important. I think everyone in our space is still figuring out what that really looks like. You see a lot of news right now around like performing these AEO audits and things of that nature. I think it's
Mhm.
still all very high level. I'm certainly not an expert in it yet, but it's definitely something that we should all be thinking about on the marketing side.
Yeah, definitely. And something I read recently, which I haven't looked too much into, but I thought was so interesting, is how these LLMs get fed and how things like press coverage can help to
Yeah.
feed that and that credibility. So, like you said, it's so interesting to think about how this will develop throughout the next year and how it will play an even bigger role in people's marketing and communication strategy.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, listen, it's like in the last almost 10 years that I we've been running Mag PR, we've gotten a lot of pushback on, kind of old school press releases, and now they have had a full revival
Hmm.
because of AEO. So, press releases are back. Um, I've seen a lot of interesting research around sort of these like playbook content. So again, content has kind of always been king now since the inbound movement, but even more so from a search perspective, having certain how-tos and guides and things of that nature are also pulling. And so I think for startups, being careful about AI slop and not just stringing together, shoddy content just to have it, because you want to be mindful of what is pulling when your brand comes up for the first time too.
Definitely. And I'm glad that you brought up press releases because I think that is such a good point to remember. And like you said, people were kind of like, I guess, crapping on it is the best way to describe it. And now it's becoming a bigger thing again. And so, in addition to what people might typically think are good for press releases, like funding announcements or any type of launch, what are some other use cases you've seen for press releases?
Yeah, there's so we're picky on purpose, right? Because
Mhm.
especially for super early stage companies, they don't necessarily want to drop the money to
Yep.
fund wire distribution, and we get that. So I would say, obviously any major milestone is a no-brainer. So funding, major executive changes are kind of important early on. We've seen CEOs turnover and things of that nature. So I think it's really important to peel back the curtain on the leadership team, especially if you're chasing new investment and things of that nature. Um, Product launches, like you mentioned, are pretty big for early stage startups. Customer use cases are huge. So if you can get a notable customer to go on the record and do a joint press release with you, that is gold for media pitching. So that's something we always try to recommend. Doesn't always happen, obviously, but if you get through that first paid pilot, for instance, and you've got a champion now, how can we leverage them for PR purposes while they're riding the high and excited about using your product? So that's one. Other than that, early on, a lot of times we will defer to blog content for media alerts, as we call
Mhm.
them, versus a formalized press release.
Definitely. And on that topic and notion of riding the high and excitement that comes from an announcement, once someone like a startup or VC firm gets featured somewhere, what do you recommend they do with that coverage or that press release?
Yeah, it's a question we get all the time. I actually just put together a checklist finally to share with a client who they're doing founder-led marketing right now, which is really tough. That's putting a million different jobs together, right, on top
Yeah.
of being the leader of the company. So obviously not sustainable, but at an early stage, we do see that fairly often. Um, I think like looking at bandwidth and what is realistic. In an ideal situation, you're prepping a press page for your website, or at least like an as featured in strip you can throw on there, just to house your coverage and get those backlinks in there. You could do blog summaries of press coverage, which is a nice way to just sort of duplicate efforts and repurpose that content. And obviously, you want to have a link through and give a nod to the outlet and give them credit for the piece. But that's one. Social media, no doubt. And I think as you're seeing, Ashley, on the social side with Dash of Social, um, having both the founder or leadership page posts and
Mhm.
also the company page posts. I know even for our agency, like me and my partner Lauren are on LinkedIn posting on our pages. I'm a lot of times forgetting myself to post from Mag
Yeah.
PR. So I get the struggle as well early on. But I think having a streamlined social strategy is really important early, making sure that you get your team on board. For startups, that could be 5 of you, but making sure that every individual is leveraging their page as well to amplify press, and tagging those outlets and the journalists that you've worked with to give it legs, as well. So those are sort of the three and pieces, along with if you do have a newsletter, that's obviously a great piece of content to throw in there for the community. And the last thing I'll say that a lot of founders will forget is to send it to your investors, right? So,
Yes.
they may have alerts set up for you, but it's a nice touch point with your investors as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And I know you mentioned this earlier, but also having that coverage for customers, being able to share it with sales
Yes.
prospects and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I'm curious too is how PR can really tie in with like other functions of a startup. Like you mentioned sales, how it ties so closely in with sales and other areas and teams and whatnot. So I'd love to hear how you collaborate with your clients, teams, and employees, because I know that's one thing you really focus on a lot.
Yeah, so it's kind of a customized process based
Mhm.
on the size of the startup and what the preference is there. I would say at this point for the earliest stage companies we're working with, the most traditional kind of comms process is that we have the marketing contact who is kind of the hunter and gatherer internally and bringing us all of the information and data and kind of heads up milestones that we need. We also sit down one to one virtually with any of the designated spokespersons. So that could be cross function, right? Depending on what we're talking about. So if we have um, an announcement tied to HR, we might be sitting down with the head of HR, just picking their brain, getting quotes, things of that nature. That could be us sitting down with the CTO or the head of engineering or head of product, to talk more technically if we're doing a product launch. So it really depends on what's happening at the startup and where we are focusing on and spending our time and energy. And so that's where that overlap will often take place.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, is that there might be more than one spokesperson, depending on what it is that you're looking for insights on or what it is that you're sharing.
Yeah, 100%. And again, we're really careful about spokespeople. We usually like to recommend that, dedicated spokespersons have proven longevity at the
Mhm.
organization. Obviously, that's unpredictable. Anyone can leave at any time, but we like to avoid, um, you know, brand new hires who have not been on for 90 days and things of that nature to, kind of mitigate risk. We only like leveraging spokespeople who are willing to be spokespeople.
Yeah, that's true.
we have we have worked a lot with folks where it's clear that they were kind of forced to step way outside their comfort zone, and sometimes it's worked out and other times it hasn't. And I
Mhm.
think cherry picking the voices within your organization who are going to be live and media facing for things like interviews or digital broadcast or broadcast opportunities, it's important to be picky
Mhm.
because that's the face of your company in that moment. And so if you're pushing somebody who's, maybe prefers to be back office and doesn't want that type of exposure, I think it's important to know your people and know who's going to best represent you. And then we can help media train them further from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Making sure that it's the right fit for everyone in both sides of the
Yeah.
spectrum. Yeah. And so, one thing I'd love to hear about too is we've chatted a lot about PR for startups, but I know you also do a lot of support with VC firms. So, I'd love to hear like use cases on that and why it's important as a VC firm to invest in something like PR.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just shifted to start supporting VCs in the last like 3 years or so, I would say, because we were working with them all already from a channel referral perspective and started to get inquiries around firm exposure and
Mhm.
firm visibility. Um, you know, in the last decade at least, there's been a huge kind of growth, I would say, in early stage firms. And so now you have a very saturated market of VCs, even though I'm sure to startups it doesn't feel that way. There are a lot of VCs who are kind of chasing the same deals.
Mhm.
And how similar to a startup or any other brand, how can they elevate visibility, build credibility, showcase their differentiators, which is huge for firms whose websites may look similar, right? How can we
Yeah.
showcase their people? Because the partners who are working hand in hand with the startups are the ones who are going to win those deals. And win the trust of the founding team. So, how can they showcase their expertise, showcase their kind of people skills and style, leadership style, and their background experience, their wins, all of those same things that you would want to see really from a startup. There's a lot of overlap with how we showcase VCs as well. Obviously, different types of conversations, different types of media that want to talk to investors a lot of the times, but they can absolutely step up as thought leaders and use media to their advantage to get that edge.
Totally. Yeah. And I love what you shared there too about how VC firms had just already been a great referral source for you and partnership to have. So it sounds like it was pretty natural to then start offering the service to them as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we still have many VCs who we don't represent, who are a channel partner to us, but we
Mhm.
have represented several firms who have seen huge benefits from it. Whether it's, leveraging us to promote owned content and research that they're doing in-house that would have otherwise just kind of sat on their website or been pushed out a couple times on social. I think in working with VC platform leaders or marketers internally, these amazing, brilliant people are wearing so many hats. They're leading events and planning events, which are a huge undertaking, as you know. They're the go-to resource for the entire portfolio if they have any questions. Okay, so there's a huge administrative piece there. Who can I use to design my website? Who can I use to do XYZ? So they are the go-to conduit for vendors really in their space across function. So they're already so inundated, and then a lot of them own brand branding
Mhm.
for the firm as well, if they haven't outsourced it. So they're I think having PR support to help feed that top of funnel awareness is hugely helpful if it's a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'm wondering too is any mistakes that you see startups or VC firms making when it comes to PR, whether it's something they're doing that they shouldn't be doing, or on the opposite end, something that they're not doing but should be doing.
Yeah, I would say the top two mistakes I see are being impatient in terms of where they're at and their kind of PR readiness level. Um, we had a client many years ago who pushed and pushed and insisted on launching, and they really hadn't done the customer feedback work, and
Hmm.
they kept pivoting. And so I saw just like drainage of dollars and finally had to say, until you have a solidified business plan, really, we're not helping you.
Mhm.
And so we're getting you coverage, but it's all over the place because you keep changing your mind. So I think having that at least a baseline solidification of, again, who you are, what you do, how it works, who you serve, those are sort of the pillars that must be in place. The second thing I would say is just having an inflated expectation that your first press announcement's 100% going to get you into TechCrunch or 100% going to get you into the Wall Street Journal. Of course, we're going to chase the cream of the crop. That's our job. But I always tell clients and set the expectation that, if that one placement is all you care about, and that's going to make or break the success of our collaboration, buy an ad
Mhm.
because PR and earned media don't work that way. And you do need to sometimes put the time in. Sometimes we get that. Sometimes we get the TechCrunch exclusive, sometimes we don't. And
Mhm.
a lot of it comes down to bandwidth of journalists, timing, and their interest in the topic. And so there are a lot of things that are out of our control. We can have the best pitch ever, the best release ever, and it doesn't land. So I think just making sure that expectations are aligned and that they understand how PR works and what its purpose is.
Yeah, great points. And on that note, if there's one thing that a startup or a VC firm could do today to kind of jumpstart their PR, what's one thing you'd recommend for them?
I would say build your messaging house.
Mm,
So, can you define your company in one or two sentences? If you can't do that yet, you're not ready.
yeah, that's a really good point. I think being able to be articulate in what it is that you do and have that, I guess, elevator pitch ready is really
Yeah,
important.
exactly. Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nina, one of my favorite questions that I love to ask our guests is for them to give a shout out to someone who's doing something cool in tech right now. So it could be a founder, could be a VC, another consultant, anyone is fair game.
Yeah, that's great. I love the concept. I cannot just shout out one client. That's not fair. So I will call out Jay Drury of DC and Co. They are an amazing branding design firm. He just kindly helped me with a deck for a VC presentation I did, which I very much appreciated, and he has top-notch work. So highly recommend him. He focuses primarily on B2B tech. So
Awesome. That's a good one. Nina, thank you so much for joining on Built and Backed this week. Now, I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to connect.
yeah, absolutely. You can definitely look me up on LinkedIn. I'm Nina Pfister at MagPR, and our website is mooringadvisorygroup.com.
Amazing. And I'll include those places in the show notes for listeners to find you from there. Thank you so much again for being today's guest.
Thank you so much for having me. Great chatting with you.